everybody. Welcome to DBC Pod. We've got the second bonus episode of The Mandalorian. We're recording this on Friday night, November 13th, Friday the 13th. And we literally just finished Chapter 11, which, Phil, I have to say, was much better than last week's episode.
Yeah, I'd watched this earlier with the family, and my first thought afterwards was, if you still feel the same way you did after Chapter 2, after this one, then I don't know what to tell you. But this was
Yep.
this had a lot of good stuff in it.
So here's what I told Phil as we were watching this about 10 minutes ago. I paused the show and I said, the last 10 minutes, and this is now I'm getting it old. This is like right as they were. Gosh, what was the exact point I paused it, Phil?
It was right as they were boarding the Imperial ship.
Right. So I said the last 5 or 10 minutes has been better Star Wars than anything that's come out in the last 20-ish years. Yeah. And I say that because the sadness of the sequels and you get into all the stuff with the prequels. But the caveat is because the prequels were so bad and because of the time of my life that they came out, I never watched the Clone Wars, and I've watched a few episodes here and there, but I never got into the story to my regret. That's something I will rectify soon. And I never watched Rebels and Resistance because I haven't had time, and maybe that's my fault too. And now part of me is sad that I didn't get to watch them because so why don't you tell everybody like all the cool characters? Because you're going to be telling me a little bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously so the interesting thing was they showed one of the characters that was in one of the trailers, who's played by Sasha Banks from WWE, and everybody's speculating on who she is and that sort of thing, and so you see her first, and everyone's like, "Oh, what's the big reveal with her?" And it turns out in this episode, the big reveal was that Katie Sackhoff is back. Or I guess back. I don't know. She's back as Bo-Katan, who was in Rebels as Bo-Katan, the voice of Bo-Katan. So it's really cool that they got her to actually play, in the live action version. And I'm not going to go into all the details in the background of the role she plays and how she's the sister of Duchess Satine and how that connects to Obi-Wan and all that sort of stuff. That's for Jason to discover in due time. But obviously, to anyone who's watched all those, this was a momentous occasion to see her on screen and to see this sort of in live action and come full circle and all that sort of stuff. So, it was a pretty momentous episode.
Yeah, I mean, so you've got a bunch of characters. So just from a storytelling point, so now we've got 3 episodes into the new season. The first episode was really good, had a little bit of lore in it, a little bit of nod to the past, cartoons and comics and stuff like that. And then second episode where everybody, I think, I was searching the internet for reactions, and a lot of people didn't like the second episode. Everybody else thought it was a waste. But then when you have an impactful third episode, when you kind of look back into it, obviously, Favreau and Filoni, they know how to tell a story,
they know what they're doing.
Right? Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, we're complaining because we just want more and better and more all the time, but you got to let a story breathe. And I think just from a story arc point of view, you had the beginning of the season, so you had to open up with something monumental, but also probably not impactful to the overall story. Like you just had a local monster of the week kind of cool. We're going to open up the season with some crate dragons, and everybody's going to love it because it's cool. It's the first episode. But then you needed, I guess, 2 episodes to let the new season breathe a little bit before you start hitting.
Well, you kind of had that tease in the first
notes.
Episode with Boba Fett at the end, and everyone was jacked. And then I think that second episode kind of was to little world building and stuff, but it was also a little bit of a palate cleanser, I guess, as far as like story arc stuff before
Totally. Totally. I agree, because now you've got heavy hitting. So you've got old characters come to life. You've got, now you're starting to see what the story is. Now you're also tying in the epic ending of season 1 into season 2. So now you see where the story is, kind of going towards. You have this behind the scenes. You have the quest for the dark saber kind of happening too. And just the other day, was it today or yesterday, where they released all the new Disney Plus shows that are coming
Yeah, I
out.
think it
So
was
you've got
just
like
today actually for all that's coming in the next year. Yeah.
so I'm sure they're going to be tying in a lot of this stuff, kind of hinting stuff, like kind of just growing the universe behind the scenes almost, which you have to do for world building to set the stage, I guess, for whatever their next movie is going to be
Yeah.
3 years from now or whatever it is. And I really like the tempo. So some of the things, Phil, you and I were commenting on was how awesome the music was in a lot of the
Yeah,
scenes.
absolutely.
So like the last one was when the Mandalorians were staging their fight into the cockpit. Like the tempo increased. You had a little bit of the theme song kind of
Yeah.
influence there. I thought that was really awesome.
Well, I liked it how when
Uh,
you had the Mandalorian, who obviously all wear armor, and you got into more of like almost a heavy metal feel, and
yep.
then when Din Djarin, like he stepped up, it went back to his music, which has more of that Western lone gunman feel to it. So I think they they obviously know what they're doing with the music on the show. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, and another thing I'm coming like ever since I've watched The Volume on the behind the scenes on Disney Plus,
Yeah.
where you kind of learn about the technology of the show. I'm constantly amazed how good the show looks
Oh yeah.
from a TV point of view. I mean, these are movie. I mean, like
Yeah.
put this on the big screen, and you could tell the difference a little bit, but it's not drastic, right? Because the
No,
scope of everything is so much smaller, right?
and I
Because
have to say with
one,
Disney Plus, we watch, especially with the holidays, we watch some of the older holiday shows, and the CGI in those compared to this is like it's a joke. Like I mean, I'm sure it's
yeah,
fine for the day, but when you like just compare what was acceptable, 10, 20 years ago to this, it's night and day.
it's insane. So here's the thing that I want to go. So let's go back to the story a little bit. As kind of like the outsider looking at this, and for everybody else out there listening, and hopefully some people are listening to our
Yeah.
bonus episodes.
No, we actually had a
Um,
decent number of downloads of our first one
oh,
covering
good,
this. So
good. So I just want to let everybody know I'm a giant Star Wars nerd, right? I've read back in the day, back in the 90s, probably up until about 2000 or so. I've read almost every single extended universe book, watched everything, consumed everything except for some comics here and there. And then in my 20s and beyond, I never really consumed anything other than the movies, right? So I kind of fallen off the less than mainstream type of stuff. And so I know all about the Mandalorians. I know what they're all about. I've heard top line stuff about the Purge and the battle and all this other stuff that goes on, but I haven't dived into any of the stories, right? So what I find fascinating is somebody with like kind of like virgin
yeah,
eyes to this whole thing. Obviously, you know all about it, right? I love how Mando is being confronted with a different truth,
hmm
and I think it's great because I'm guaranteed vast majority of people watching this probably don't know as much as you do, or any of the hardcore fans about the background of all the
right.
characters. I'm going to assume that, right? Because I think this show's kind of broken the
I think so.
zeitgeist,
I mean, obviously, the
right?
people that are watching all the YouTube recaps and Easter eggs are like me, but the average Disney Plus subscriber doesn't know
Right.
all the background.
So just if we take this in a vacuum without and assuming the only thing you've ever seen was just the motion pictures,
hmm
right? So I love how the truth is different. So you're all of a sudden like here he is a guy. All he knows is as a foundling, he's been brought into this new family. He's been brought up a certain way. He has got this creed, and they're zealots to following this creed,
Yeah,
and he doesn't know anything about his people. He knows some lore. He knows some quote unquote ancient
yeah,
history. And with Star Wars, you never know if ancient history was 20 years
yeah,
ago or 500 years ago. But it's he finally sees somebody that's confident that knows what they're talking about, and he's all of a sudden he is an outcast among outcasts now,
yeah.
with people being the watch and being zealots about a certain way or whatever. You kind of got a hint of some, which I really love, and I wish some of the movies had done this properly. Was you kind of get a sense of depth to the universe,
Yeah.
right? So you're following this guy around and you're telling the story of Baby Yoda. He finds him, he's trying to find it. So it's a very like personal story. It's very one on one. It's very ground level. And then you got a little bit of taste of the Empire in season 1 by getting the bounty to find Baby Yoda. You seen like the Empire at the end with the dark saber and everything else. Like, oh, there's something else going on, and then it moves away from that. But now you have the struggle for Mandalore. You've got a Imperial cruiser or freighter with clean stormtrooper
Right.
outfits or armor, and Imperials and everything else. It's kind of like the old way of the Empire, quote unquote, before the rebellion. And there's world building behind that, and it's just like 10 seconds of stuff.
Yeah.
But that's what the OT did, right? It's that one scene where all the regional governors have gotten power from the Senate type of thing, and it's like all those little key phrases that just give you hints of
Yeah.
depth. And I thought that was wonderful.
Well, I think
And that
that's a big thing in the Mandalorian in this time frame is sort of where is the power, right? You know that the Emperor's been defeated and the second Death Star has been blown up, but there's not firm control over everywhere, and it's sort of
and frankly, we don't. The sequels never told us what was going on.
no. It's like all of a sudden, then I guess the sequels tried to show that then the First Order tried to fill that vacuum, I guess, but obviously this is clearly the in between time.
Well, I mean, the sequels just basically just we are the First Order. Yeah. We have another Death Star. Yeah. Bunch of planets blown up, and now we control everything. And Palpatine is back.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Like there was zero world building in the sequels, zero. And with just one episode, I feel like there is crazy amounts of world building. And what I really enjoy is instead of just having flashy lightsabers and Jedi running around going crazy, even though it's been 40-ish years since the fall of the Empire.
No, it's only like
what's the timeline?
It's less than that. It's only like 5 years after.
No. From the end of the prequels.
Oh, the end of the prequels. Yeah. So
yeah, not the gap between Jedi and Return of the Jedi in this, but from once Palpatine took over.
Oh yeah,
the fall of the old Republic.
So it's about 30 years maybe.
Right. So the details. What I was getting at is I need to find these Jedi, these sorcerers. Right. Mm-hmm. It's still like what I love is they're bringing the mystical kind of nature behind the Jedi rather than I know what the Jedi are. They're just guys that can do this, and that's like normal.
Well, that's always been a big thing where it's like, wait a minute, there were thousands of Jedis in the galaxy, and why do nobody knows about them? And it's like, well, yeah, they were kind of concentrated in certain areas, and then the Empire won the First War, so they obviously got to write the history books for 30 years, and they sort of downplayed the Jedi.
Well, I mean, that's the whole problem with Star Wars timeline. Exactly. I mean, you have this scientific, technological, advanced society that's galaxy spanning, and you forget what Jedi are in the span of 10 years.
Yeah, exactly.
It does make sense. But I mean, leave that as it may. Even in the original trilogy, before the prequels kind of ruined everything, was like, your ancient religion, right? And that was great. And no one knew what Jedi were. And then the prequels were like, yeah, we have Jedi school and, younglings and, it's everywhere. You might as well be watching it on TV and the YouTube channels of Star Wars. And the prequels kind of ignored the whole thing. The sequels just basically ignored everything. It was basically the sequels assumed everybody had watched the prequels and the original trilogy. Like the actual characters knew what was going on in the films. But what you're seeing brought back is that mysticism again. I mean, it's a long-winded kind of explanation.
What's the uncertainty, I think, of the area and the timeline and
well, I mean, I think it's the same uncertainty that you had in A New Hope, right? It's just you have an empire that took over, and you don't know why, but that's the story. And you have this ancient religion. Like, when you say ancient religion, you're thinking it's been, a couple of people for, like, hundreds of years have been, like, holding on to it. And probably the younglings, the prequels probably should have taken 1,000 years before or whatever, right? Because that's the sense of time that you get. And that sense of time has been screwed with the storyline. But going back to this single episode, you've got beautiful world building and you've got the mysticism back of like these Jedi or like super powerful, rare, I have no idea who they are type of things. And I think what's going to happen in future episodes, hinting at some of the stuff that you told about, where the what is the you said the Duchess character, the lead
Well, so
Mandalorian,
Bo-Katan is the lead
Bo-Katan.
Mandalorian. I don't want to give away too much to you what happens in there, but yeah, she's a key character in the Rebels.
I mean, I vaguely know all of it, so you're not really
Yeah,
spoiling anything. It's not like I'm
yeah.
totally like in the dark with all this stuff, but
But let's just say,
you
like back, she's very familiar with the Jedi you would know, and she's
yeah.
very
So no,
familiar with Ahsoka. So I mean, I think that's the key thing this episode left us with was, and it was. I also noted when I was watching it the second time with you, she doesn't say I know where a Jedi is. She knows. She says I know where one of their kind is, and then she tells us it's Ahsoka. Which, if you've
I
watched the
and
show, you know Ahsoka left the Jedi
I
Order
know her
and all that stuff.
character,
Yeah,
and I've watched all like the main plot
yeah,
lines with her briefly, like not the episodes
yeah,
themselves, but like anyway. I thought I heard her name
yeah,
because that's the point I was getting to next. Is like, was that the name I heard?
yeah,
Because I wanted to rewind it, but I knew that you knew it, so I was
yeah.
waiting for the show
No,
to
no.
actually ask you, like, did I
No,
mishear
yeah,
that
she said,
or
"Go
not?
seek out Ahsoka Tano, who is, I mean, everybody's just been waiting
That's just
years to
nuts.
see her in live action." And
I know. I mean, like, I feel like I need to go watch the Clone Wars before we actually see her, just so I can get that sense of history
yeah,
with that character. But what I think is going to be interesting is so you have the world building in Mandalorian and the diatribe that I just kind of went off with the mysticism and everything else like that. But so what's going to happen is when you start tying in those other characters, the poor world building and the poor timeline telling is going to crash into the Mandalorian.
yeah,
And it's going to be very interesting how Favreau and Filoni kind of like sand that down and even out everything that we know
yeah,
that's going to happen, right? So, no, everybody knows Empire versus Rebellion and all this unsure times. We know the political backness. We saw the X-wings last week, which I think was an excellent touch in
Mhm.
2020 hindsight, right? So you kind of get that sense. But what's going to happen is you're going to have somebody that understands the fall of Anakin Skywalker, the rise of Darth Vader. That's going to start kind of getting into everything, right?
Yep.
And you're all of a sudden going to be crashing in what 40-ish years of Star Wars history kind of
roughly,
being
yeah,
just dropped into the lap of the Mandalorian.
yeah.
Because it's not going
Well,
to like their storylines are going to brush together, right? It's going to be entwined
yeah,
because
and
you have major players coming
that's
in
what people
there.
are kind of saying. Like he couldn't just find a random Mandalorian. Like it was Bo-Katan knew the history. She knew the Jedi, and Ahsoka knows it better than anyone. I mean, and she's not necessarily a Jedi, but she can explain things, and she knows Yoda. Like she'll kind of be able to explain it to him. And one thing I love though is that he kind of left at the end. So it's like, yeah, Bo Katan came in and everyone loves her from the Clone Wars and stuff, but she didn't take over. It's now not the Bo Katan show. It's still the Mandalorian show. It's just that she was there to
Right.
help move the story
So
forward and stuff like that.
so what's going to happen? I'm afraid of for you in-depth fans out there is you're getting stoked, right? You got Bo-Katan, you've got Ahsoka. They're going to brush against the storyline
Hmm.
and leave
Yeah.
because the Mandalorian's going to go on, right? He's going to deliver the child, and then there's going to be some other plot line. So here's the interesting point. Do you think the Mandalorian's going to stick with like the low grade kind of storyline type of thing, or do you think it's going to escalate into like more of an epic story where he gets pulled into a broader fight that's no longer about him, but now about more stuff?
If I had to guess, I think the bulk of this season is still just going to be brushing against
Nope,
it.
not this season. The whole show,
Oh,
the
the whole
whole
show.
run.
I think starting in whether it's next year or the year after, he will get pulled into something larger. I think where this season will stay kind of more focused on him and smaller things,
I agree.
but I think at some point, I mean, you can't introduce all these characters and then there's this big huge thing going on, and I mean at some point it's going to turn into what happens in the they already touched on with some of the characters from the aftermath novels and stuff. Like it's not next year, but it's not too far along that all of a sudden the First Order comes about. So it's like at some point, whether it's Maz or whoever from the sequels is going to pop up, and
Sure.
I think at some point they will. But I definitely don't think it's this year. I think it's at least we at
Oh,
least have
I
a
don't
year
think
for
so
this one.
either. No, I think you're right. The here's my issue because how Star Wars the story is all screwed up. So in the prequels, right, you have Anakin as a boy,
Right.
Anakin as a Padawan and a young Jedi, and then Anakin in the throes of his power turning to the dark side and becoming Darth Vader for the first time, right? That's that arc. But in between, you have the Clone Wars and the breadth of character building that you saw in that show with Obi-Wan and Ahsoka and all the trials and
Yep.
tribulations. And I know there's been amazing character development of Anakin. Like there's people out there that love the character of Anakin because of that cartoon show.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And not because of the movies.
No.
The movies are irrelevant, but the cartoon, like it was excellent character building in that. And that's one of the things I'm looking forward to. So, but the problem is Ahsoka's never been mentioned anywhere else in anything. So you have this person that's wandering the galaxy that intimately knows Darth Vader in and out more than anybody else. Probably almost more than Obi-Wan himself.
Maybe.
And never mentioned in the OT. Never mentioned in the sequels. And what's going to be interesting is if she plays a semi-prominent role in this, she's going to stick out like a sore thumb of the absence of her character in the actual movies.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah, she's the actual. I mean, excuse me. The movies are the tent poles of Star Wars franchise. You can't argue with that. Whether the Clone Wars was a better story, better written, and all that other stuff, I'm not going to argue that at all. But the vast majority of Star Wars lore by everybody in the world are the movies. Let's put it that way. And how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, I mean they tried to touch on that a bit in Rebels, at the end of Rebels with Ahsoka and stuff, but obviously they leave that off. And I don't want to spoil the end of Rebels to you, but what Ahsoka goes on, and then there's obviously key characters, other Force sensitive people in Jedi that she's searching for, and so where is she with that process, and when the Mandalorian finds him and stuff. So how that all ties together, and without overdoing it, without how does that fit in with other Force sensitive people? What happens to her before the Force Awakens, right? I mean, if she's still she's still around, she's searching for other Force users that are around, but they're gone before the Force Awakens. What happens to them? So I mean, they have a lot of touchy ground to touch on.
You patched in her character to the prequels after the fact, right? So, okay, we can hand wave all that stuff. And we can hand wave the OT because
I mean, they do that in Rebels.
Right?
They definitely deal with who she's dealing with and what she's dealing with during Rebels. I think they, whether you're fully satisfied with it or not, they definitely
but you could deal with that.
Yeah,
you could deal with that. That's fine. My issue is then with the sequels. Like it's all Leia, Han, Luke, Rey, and her character is nowhere to be seen. She plays a prominent role in Star Wars history.
Yes.
And she's never mentioned.
Yeah.
And that's why I think Disney should just retcon the sequels out. Just like we're going to put the COVID-19 stamp on the sequels. Our bad. They never happened.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if they could do that, and I mean, they're not, but like they should. And just because there's too many too many hoops that
Yeah,
you have to
somehow
jump
they need
through.
to explain it because I mean, certainly Yoda, who as a Force ghost talked to Luke, talked to everybody, knows
Never
who.
brought her up.
Never brought her up. Leia knows who she is. Never brought her up. Like at some point, it would have come up in conversation, right?
Yeah, it's a little frustrating, and that's why. And I think we didn't really discuss too much of this episode, but kind of like, and I don't think we need to
Yeah,
because it was a simple episode, right? So his ship was messed up. They got to where they needed to go. The ship got fixed. He met the other Mandalorians, which sparked up this
yep.
conversation. You saw the mysterious cloaked figure in the beginning, the Sasha Banks character, and then he knows where he has to go
Yeah.
next. He's going forth to the next location to find Ahsoka, right? So the next episode is going to hopefully be big. Hopefully it's not going to be another dud where it's just like we found space pirates again, and you have to wait 2 weeks. So I think this conversation that we had tonight helps us prepare our minds and our expectations for what's to come, because I think it's going to be exciting.
I think so, and I think if episode 2 taught us anything was don't get, I guess, too down if episode 4 is another breather one, but trust in
Trust the
Filoni.
process.
Yeah, trust the process. Trust Filoni. Um, but yeah, this as a Star Wars fan, and I'm glad that you were as excited as it was without having watched Clone Wars and Rebels. And for those of us who have, I think it made us. It really had the feel of an episode of Clone Wars or Rebels, just with all the Mandalorians and stuff like that. Just it
Sure.
really did. So it was definitely a little treat for
Well,
us.
I mean, like I've always considered before Rebels and everything else came out, when it was just the Clone Wars, I always considered like comics to be like, kind of extended universe
Yeah.
type of stuff, right? Cool background information. Maybe it's fun. Maybe it amounts to a paragraph in the Wikipedia type of thing. And I've certainly read a lot of the books back in the day. And the Clone Wars I always thought was like, yeah, that's fun Star Wars, but I don't need to get into it. It's just kind of a filler story and for a series of movies that weren't really well received. Obviously, I made the mistake because there's some very good character building in there. But knowing about it and seeing it kind of, because The Mandalorian's basically the best Star Wars, and I think I said this last week, it's the best Star Wars in the last 30 years, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue certainly live action. I mean, you could argue some of Rebels is better, but it's
No, I'm going to say, even though I will respect everybody's opinion on all the cartoons and the storytelling and everything else, because it's probably masterful, it's probably extremely well done. But the cartoons do not reach the mass audience the way
correct.
something like The Mandalorian and the movies do, right?
Yes.
So when I say best Star Wars, I mean best Star Wars that also impacts the mass culture of Star Wars in the cultural zeitgeist out there.
100% agree with that.
Right? So like The Mandalorian is the tent pole, is
It's the new temple.
Standard bearer of Star Wars moving forward.
Yes.
And I am ecstatic that there's some depth behind it. And regardless of, I can have a handful of crappy episodes coming up, and I'll still be happy knowing that they're tying things together.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can go on.
Yeah, we didn't even get into
hour.
some of the little things, like how he had the calamari credits to pay that he got in like the first episode of season 1. And, I mean,
good tie back.
Like they know they know how to tell stories and they know how to tie it all together, right? Like,
yes, and we haven't seen that with Star Wars since the original trilogy, when Lucas had the help of his wife and all the other writers around him to support his excellent vision.
Edit his vision too.
Exactly. So, all right, we're about to hit the 30-minute mark, and I think it's a perfect time to stop, Phil.
Yep.
I like this. My wife usually falls asleep around. We watch this at 9:00 on Friday. My wife usually falls asleep on weekdays when she's teaching the kids all day, around 9:30 or so. And this gives me a perfect excuse to watch The Mandalorian, even though it's your second go around.
No, it's great. It's actually because when I watch with my kids, we have to pause for like water breaks and potty breaks and stuff like that. So it's like I enjoy our. It's my second viewing, but it's my serious viewing of it.
Well, here's the thing. If I were to watch, I would either be watching this by myself or watching it with my wife half asleep asking questions, and she doesn't know anything about Star Wars at all. And to watch it with another Star Wars fan is truly a treat for me every single week.
But
So
I'm
I do
glad
appreciate you
to
coming on and
hear
watching
that
that.
I am you prefer me to your half asleep wife.
Yeah, well, that and we get to have a couple drinks together also. Well, we'll go through the process. Oh, it never hurts that. All right, guys. Well, thank you for listening. We're going to be recording our weekly episode in 2 nights. We got a great guest coming up. Phil, I'm assuming if I get this done tomorrow morning, you can get this up tomorrow
Correct.
evening.
Yep.
We'll have the wonderful Ryan Teets coming on this weekend. We just got to make sure we got the time all lined up, but he's good to go for this weekend.
Yeah, and he just
went.
he just came back from Walt Disney World and
Yep.
also had his first ever visit to Universal. So it'll be great to get his views on that. And also, obviously, Disney had their earnings out, and he will be able to speak to that probably better than either you or I could.
Yep, he was actually on the call listening in, so he heard everything. So this week, I think, Phil, I think we should do a different show this week. I think we're just going to skip the news, skip the topics, and just kind of go into his trip review, and what's going on with the investor call.
Absolutely.
So look forward to that on Monday when we typically get these things out. But that being said, have a good night, everybody, and talk to you in a couple days.
Take care.